Hi everyone, it's Annie. I'm going to show you how I made this pendant using the Shell impression die. I'm using TR-OC215, but you can use any impression die you'd like for this. I'm going to press this solid, so I melted enough fine silver to fill the impression and also having a little bit left over to make it easier to pop the metal out of the die. Centered it in my press, pressed it, and then I rotated it 90 degrees and pressed again. This just helps get an even pressing. You can see I didn't quite get all of the detail, so I'm going to anneal the silver again and trim any of the excess metal from around the impression. You do want to make sure that you're still leaving a lip in some areas so that you can pop your piece out. And now that I've trimmed it, I'm going to press it again. And I'll press and rotate until I get all the detail. I used a file and sanding burrs to clean up the edges of the stamping, and then I soldered a closed ring to the top. I used hard solder to attach the ring, since this is the only solder joint that's going to be on this piece. For the stone, I am using annealed 22 gauge strip, and I'm wrapping it tightly around the stone by hand. And then once I get the ends bent over until they're touching, I mark where I'm going to cut and then trim at that mark. And that will give me the length of my bezel. You want to adjust the ends of the bezel to make sure it's a flush fit. And I also like to go in with pliers and refine some of the corners, any of the shape that I need to. I soldered the bezel strip with hard solder as well, and now I'm cutting out a back plate. Solder the bezel to the back plate, leaving a little border all the way around. Rather than drilling a plain round hole in the back plate, I am going to pierce a very rough shell or scalloped shape design. I made a divot and then drilled a hole. And now I'm going to use a 4/0 saw blade and just roughly follow the marker line drawing I did. Since the theme of the pendant is beachy, I wanted to add a small shell-like design to the back just to continue that design element. Next, you want to use a file or sanding discs, whatever you have on hand. You want to remove excess metal from the back plate. I like to leave an even perimeter around the bezel. That just gives it a nice little bit of depth. I am using a Sharpie to mark along the inside edge of the bezel. I'm using this like layout fluid, and this is just to give a solid background to the next step. Cabochons are often not the same height all the way around the perimeter of the stone. So by coloring the inside of this bezel, I can take the tip of a pair of tweezers or anything kind of sharp and rest one jaw along the top of the cabochon and scribe through that marker layer onto the metal. And this scribed line will give you a reference for where you need to lower the height of the bezel around the stone. After you scribe that line, pop the stone out, and now with the black background, you're able to easily see that scribed mark. So now all you need to do is use a file or grinders, whatever you want, to remove the bezel down to that line. And even though the bezel itself, it looks uneven, what this does is it makes the finished bezel around your stone look finished and even. Matching the bezel height to the stone makes the finished bezel more even and professional. I like using this 22 gauge strip for the bezel, but what I like to do also is slightly give a bevel to that top outer edge. This thins the metal at that point and makes it easier to press over the stone. I soldered a ring to the bottom of the bezel, and now I'm cleaning it up with an Eve pumice wheel. You can finish it however you'd like. Next, attach the bezel and the shell stamping with a jump ring and solder that jump ring closed. I would use probably medium solder for this. After that, you can add a bail and apply a patina. This is Black Max. And all that's left to do is set the stone. Experiment with different stones, different impression dyes. You could make an entire beachy suite of jewelry with some of the impression dyes that we have at Potter USA. Experiment with different textures on your backplate and have fun. Thanks for watching.